Last week, we concluded with the story about Stauber and the Lubavitcher Rebbe, in which the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, it's not that God needs our mitzvot, it's God loves us and He's giving us a pathway to Him. It's for us. And we got into that from discussing kosher, what kosher is not. Specifically last week, the focus what it's not. It's not a healthy diet. It's a spiritual diet for a physical body. And indeed, this is the perspective for all of the mitzvot. The mitzvot are not there to give us a hard time. They weren't given to us to stifle us, to restrict us, to crimp our style. They were rather there to elevate us, to enrich us. The mitzvah is the physical embodiment of God's love for us and our love for Him. And we're going to spend some time now on discussing that idea of what is a mitzvah. And then we'll bring it back to kosher eventually. But right now it's, in general, the idea of an infinite God commanding a finite being to do something that's important to Him. What's that all about? How are we to understand of it? There's a statement, the greatest reward for the mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. And what we'll eventually talk about is do you do any of the commandments because you're promised a reward for it? Is it that I'm going to be paid back for this? And when I say paid back, it's not that He's going to give me a check. It's that the Torah promises me that there'll be blessings in my life for it. That's a decent, a good motivating factor. Is that the reason I do things? Or is it heavenly? I'm promised to get into a heavenly world after 120 years. That's why I'm doing things. Or is it that the mitzvah itself is the reward? The very fact that I was able to do this, that feeling that I get from that in itself is the reward. And we'll elaborate it as we go along with this. Doesn't mean that doesn't come along with struggle. Mitzvahs do, some of them especially, have a struggle to it. If someone is not used to a kosher diet, and then they decide to go kosher, it's effort. It's effort getting used to, it's change in lifestyle, it's change of the restaurants you used to frequent, the events perhaps you used to frequent. It's hard going to a baseball game and not ordering the hot dog. Although if you go to Dodger Stadium, there is glatt kosher hot dogs available at Dodger Stadium and Yankee Stadium and Citi Field and Baltimore. I've tried them all. So there is an element of effort and struggle, and I would say cost as well. There is cost involved in the mitzvahs. But then again, what in life that has value to you doesn't require effort and financial commitment? So it's everything that we really want in life comes along with some element of struggle and toil. I'll tell you this short parable. There is a story of a centipede and a frog. And the frog really didn't like the centipede. Really didn't care for the centipede. Because the centipede was so fast, and although the frog can take leaps, it could never catch up to the centipede. And this bothered the frog. So the frog would always try to trip up the centipede. But the centipede moved so fast because of her many legs that the frog could never catch up. So one day, the frog came up with a brilliant idea. The next time the frog saw the centipede, he calls out and he says, "Hey, Miss Centipede." And the centipede says, "Yes." And the frog says, "I've been thinking about something for a long time. When you walk, which foot do you put first? I see you zooming down the street, and it's fascinating to see so many legs working simultaneously at the same time. But which leg goes first?" How do you know which leg to put forth first? The centipede stopped, scratched her head, and said, never thought about that. Let me think. And from that day on, the centipede could never walk again. It overthought it. The moment you need to stop and think and analyze, now you're stalled. When you just let it happen, you fly with 100 legs, you move real quickly. But the moment you stop to overanalyze something, you're stuck. Sometimes we think something to death, and we overthink it. We hear about a mitzvah that the Torah talks to us about, and we have to start over-philosophizing it. And we have to just start dissecting it, and then debating it, and then analyzing it. And we do that for about 20 years. And then after we finally have completed that study, then we start saying, okay, I get it, but does it match me? Does it fit for me? Is it fit for my life and my lifestyle? So we start going through psychoanalysis about ourselves. If we just stop for a moment and just did it, just do it, get into it, move to the rhythm that the Torah tries to prescribe to us, you'll find just how natural it really feels. Because the truth of the matter is, every mitzvah has been part of you since even before conception. Before your soul was sent down to this world, it already had an understanding, an inner understanding of all the mitzvot and why they should be done. We get into this world and we start becoming that centipede where we don't know what leg to put forth first. So some study, absolutely. Some understanding, absolutely. And we'll present that for you. But this doesn't have to be a 20-year study. Once we understand that the Torah is God's way of communicating with us, for our benefit, it just makes it flow so much better. This little kindergarten girl came home from school, and she says to her mommy, "Mommy, where do I come from?" And the mommy blushes. And the mommy tries explaining on the kindergarten level, there's birds and there's bees. And the child's got this blank look on her face and she can't understand what mommy's trying to say. So finally mommy says, "Why don't you wait for daddy to come home and ask him the question?" So daddy comes home. And daddy squirms a little bit and says, well, you see, daddy loves mommy, and he has a strange way of expressing it, and that's how you come about. And again, she's got this very blank look on her face. And he finally says, "You know what? Uncle Tom knows how to explain this stuff a lot better. Go ask Uncle Tom." Uncle Tom is asked, and he starts drawing a graph of the sperm and his eggs and everything like this. This poor kindergarten kid is staring, doesn't get it. And finally, in total frustration, the kid says, "I don't understand, everyone. Today in class, the teacher asked where we come from. Billy said he comes from Philadelphia. Where do I come from? That's all I want to know." We overcomplicate things often. We got to ask Uncle Tom, got to ask this, we got to ask this. It's not that complicated. We're Jews. We're descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or we converted to Judaism. And God gave this nation, a chosen people, a way of life. It's a way of life that works. Proof that it's worked, it's lasted for thousands of years. It brings fulfillment. It brings joy, it brings purpose, it brings nachas into our lives, it creates a better world for all, and he calls out to us as our king and as our father, and he says, "Please, my child, follow me. This is a path for you. It would lead to a life of blessings." Let's open up our hearts and our minds to go down this path. The basis of observance, and again, our focus this semester is going to be on kosher, but for now I'll generalize it. The basis of observance for all commandments is because God commanded us, because God instructed us, because God told us so. And we have a belief that everything that God commands us is because He loves us and cares for us. In about a week or two, I'm going to take this in the direction of dissecting it, and as I gave you some examples, as to why, and any mitzvah that you do, any commandment that you do, if you ask yourself this question, why do I do it? You may have all different answers and they may all be correct. Why do I do it? It may be I do it in the memory of my parents or grandparents. I do it in honor of them. I knew how important this was to them. It may be a sense of Jewish pride. You feel proud when you do this. It may be because the actual commandment is very meaningful to you. You gain something from it. You may not enjoy fasting on Yom Kippur, but it means something to you. The idea that there's a day of atonement and a day of forgiveness, to be forgiven and to offer forgiveness, is something that's very meaningful to you. So you may each have your reason, or as I said before, because the Torah says that there'll be blessings, and I like blessings. Or it can be the opposite. It can be that you've gone through struggles in your life and you're finding some pathway so that God will bless you to get out of the crisis that you're in, and you figure it can't hurt to try. Like a doctor gives you a prescription, you try it, you hope it will relieve the illness. You're going to try a mitzvah because you hope it will relieve something going on in your life. These are all legitimate, by the way. Everything I'm presenting to you are possibilities, and each one might be slightly different. Or as I mentioned, it's a belief of the heavenly world. That after 120 years here on earth, I'd like to get into heaven. And therefore, I don't want to take any chances. If this is my ticket for eternity, I'm going to go for it. And so there'll be many different possibilities that we'll get into. But I want to try it from a different perspective. And I said I'm going to leave this for a week or two from now. And that is, why would God command it to me? The first way is why I'm doing it. But what about from the God perspective? What does God get from it? What does an infinite God get out of the decision I make what to eat or what not to eat, what to do on the seventh day of the week, what not to do on the seventh day of the week? He's infinite. He created it all. Is there any type of effect that I can have on an infinite God who created me? And again, pause that in your mind. We'll get back to all of those questions. For now, I want to take even a step further back and discuss mitzvot in general. We have 613 of them. And we can divide the 613 into 3 categories. And that's what I'm going to focus on now. 3 categories of the 613. Category number 1, we'll call in its Hebrew name, and I'll explain it in English, Eidut. Eidut means a witness, an aid, a witness. What these are testimonial laws. What does a testimonial law mean? I'll give you an example, testimonial. Comes Passover, you're going to sit down to something the first and second night of Passover called a Seder. At the Seder you're going to eat matzah. Right, let's just pick that as an example. Why are you doing that? Why do we all keep Passover? Why do we have a Seder? To remember that our ancestors were slaves in Egypt, and that God took them out of Egypt, and God gave them freedom, and God split the sea for them, and God brought them to Mount Sinai. I'm going to do this ritual because the ritual itself reminds me of an important principle that God wants always to be on my mind. He gave me my freedom. God gave us our freedom. And for that, I have an entire holiday called Passover. And on Passover, I have a Seder night that is so packed with rituals and traditions. But everyone is to serve as testimony of an event that happened. And God wants me to remember that event. Don't forget that event. That's a testimonial law. Shabbat. Why do we keep Shabbat? We testify that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. And for that, I keep the Sabbath. All the traditions associated with the Sabbath are connected to remind me and to remind the world that this is God's world, that He created it. It's a testimonial law. Why do we put on the tefillin, the boxes on our hands and our heads? It's a testimonial law. When we put it on, we will remember. The box faces the heart. It's on my hand, that my heart needs to be devoted to God, that the actions of my hand needs to be devoted to God, that my thinking on my head needs to be divided to God. They are all triggers of what it wants to accomplish. It wants to accomplish something. The Torah will define to me in great detail what that particular mitzvah should trigger within us. And so many of the commandments in the Torah will say, and do this so that you will, and finish the sentence, depending what the commandment will be. Rituals. Now, I've often asked this question, if the ritual is to lead me to think about something, why not just instruct me to think about something? If the whole idea of Passover is so that I remember the Exodus, why do I have to go through this whole process of cleaning my house for a month before, of changing the dishes, of getting the kitchen ready, and preparing all the food, and buying the matzah, and shopping, and all this type of stuff? Instead, the first night of Passover, I get my family together, and I make an announcement. Boys and girls, children and grandchildren, remember God took us out of Egypt. If everything was just a trigger to bring me to remember, let's just jump right to the remember. Why do I need the ritual itself in order so that I remember? Why not just get to the speech? Give a lecture. Does that not accomplish the same thing? It's interesting. It's the ritual that makes it happen. You might say you'll attend the lecture instead because it sounds cheaper and easier, but chances are you're not going to that lecture. You're not going to remember without the ritual. The ritual is the reason you remember. If I simply just said remember it, you're going to forget it. It's the ritual that causes the memory to kick in. It's the mitzvah, it's the act that makes the message stay alive. Proof? Those that have kept the rituals are still involved in Jewish practice. Those that have dropped the rituals have assimilated away. The ritual keeps you connected. The ritual is the vehicle. Think of it as a car that takes the message from point A and transports it to point B. If I have to get a message from point A to point B, the only way to do it is by the ritual. That's the vehicle. The only way to get it from generation 1 to generation 2 to generation 3 to generation 4 and onwards is that it's attached to a ritual. So when God says to Moses, I want them to remember, if he just left it there, God and the Exodus story would have been forgotten in a generation or 2, 3 at most. But because he connected it to a ritual of bake the matzah, the same matzah that you had in Egypt, clean out the house of chametz, and we're so busy with the ritual that the message tagged along from one generation to the next, and we're thousands of years after the Exodus, and we still talk about it. And Hollywood still makes movies about it. How is it that the Exodus is still so much alive in humanity throughout the entire world, in that every religion and every person on the face of the earth is aware of it? Is because there were rituals connected to it. Children know about the story of Hanukkah because they light a menorah. And because they light the menorah, the word Maccabees means something to them. If it wasn't the ritual, they wouldn't know. The ritual carries it. It brings the message. The Gragar on Purim, the reading of the Megillah. I can go through so many, but you get the idea. That's what a testimonial mitzvah is about. It has a message connected to it. I'll share a story with you of two survivors, two brothers. There used to be 9 children in the Weiner family. They were from a shtetl in Poland. Only 2 brothers survived. Zalman and Yaakov and Jacob. They survived. After the war, Zalman immigrated to London, and Jacob ended up in Argentina. They each opened up their own business in their respective cities. They each tried to rebuild their shattered lives. Each got married and raised a family. London, Argentina. The 2 brothers, however, took different paths in life. Zalman remained connected to his Jewish roots. They were brought up in an observant family. Yeah.
Where was Zalman living?
Zalman was in London. In London. And he remained true to the ways of his past. He kept all the traditions, all the mitzvot. It was an observant family. And Jacob in Buenos Aires slowly but surely dropped it all. Each went their separate path, but at the same time, they remained close with one another. They wrote letters to one another. We used to do that in the generations earlier. There was something called a letter. We actually took a pen. People don't know about this, I'm telling you. You write dear, you write the name of the person dear, and you actually write something in a pen. You would fold up the letter, you put it in an envelope, and then you would address it, not with an email address. You would actually put a physical address, and then you would have to put postage on it and give it to a mailman or drop it in a mailbox or bring it to the post office. And after a few weeks, another person in another part of the world will bring that letter to the other home. Most kids today would have no idea what I just spoke about. They know that there's an email, there's a text message, and there's WhatsApp. That's how you communicate. But the idea of putting something and writing a letter, anyway, they stayed in touch. Once in a while, they did a long-distance phone call. Again, kids today will have no idea what the words even mean, a long-distance phone call. But they stayed in touch. But Zalman's heart ached terribly by the fact that his brother had given up the ways of their parents, that he dropped it all. But it wouldn't affect his love for his brother. He stayed very close with him, but it bothered him. One day, 1965, so you understand this is 20 years later after they find their new homes, Yaakov, Jacob, invites Zalman and his family to come on over to Buenos Aires. Come visit. And he immediately says, and I know you need a synagogue nearby, there's a synagogue on the block, and I know you need kosher food, there's a kosher store here, we'll take care of everything. All of your needs will be met. You don't have to worry by the fact that we're not practicing, and you are. I know it all, and I'll make sure that you're comfortable. And Zalman was so excited by the fact of, you know what, it's time for us to actually get together, not just in letter form, not just in phone calls. Let the families get together, let the cousins get to know one another. And they had a very emotional reunion. They spent so much time just reminiscing about the good times and, of course, the bad times and the siblings that they have lost. They spoke about their parents, and they spoke about the old shtetl. They spoke about their old lives. They spoke about the cheder that they went to. They were just reliving life. They laughed and they cried, and more than anything, they bonded together again. And one late afternoon during this trip, Zalman says to Jacob, Yankel, his Hebrew name, I think it's time for us to put up a tombstone for our parents. I think it's time. They loved us, they cared for us, they lived for us. That's the least we can do. So he says, of course, but Zalman, our parents were killed in Auschwitz. They were cremated. There's no place for us to put up a tombstone. So he says, I have something in mind. So he says, Zalman, if you're thinking about taking a trip there, I will get nowhere close to Auschwitz. I can't do it. I just can't. So if that's what you have in mind, I can't be a part of it. You can do it, but I can't. He says, no, that's not really what I had in mind. I will show you the tombstone that I have in mind for our parents. Come with me. And he goes into his guest room with his brother. And he takes out his tallis and his tefillin. And he takes out his tefillin. You know, there's two parts of the tefillin, the one that goes on the hand and the one that goes on the head. He takes the hand one and he puts it next to his brother's hand. He says, that would be a good tombstone for our father. And he takes the other one and he puts it next to his brother's head and he says, and that would be a good tombstone for our mother. You want to remember them? Do what they raised you to do. That's the best way to remember them. And his brother just burst out crying. It wasn't a debate about you should. It wasn't that. It was, this is the vehicle. This is the way we pass the message from one generation to the next. Hitler took them out of this world prematurely. Don't let the message stop. And his brother took the tefillin, put them on by himself. He remembered the blessings. He remembered the Shema by heart. And he spent the rest of that afternoon crying tears of feeling that closeness and that bond to his parents. Testimonial. We do things, not just lip service. The act of doing something is more powerful than words. So wherever we turn in Judaism, there is an act, a ritual, a mitzvah of doing something that's called for. This not only is what makes it part of your life and part of your existence, it makes it part of the world's existence. The world becomes aware of the message. Messages get through to the world because of us, because of the Jewish people. Not because we're great preachers, but because of what we do, the doing, the mitzvah. The reason the world is aware of the Sabbath is because they saw Jews keeping the Sabbath. And so they adopted a day of rest. It doesn't have to be with all the rituals of the Jewish people, but the idea that there's a day of rest in all of the world is a Jewish accomplishment because they saw Jews keeping the Sabbath. The reason the world has adopted the concept of a holiday, any of its holidays, is because they saw the Jewish people practicing holidays. They saw it. It didn't mean they went to a lecture about the holidays. They saw the Jews so excited about their holidays, so can we have some too? What on our calendar can we mark that we can celebrate? You know, I do believe, if you think about it, President's Day is meaningless to most people other than a day off from work. Why? Because no ritual was connected to it. If you merely put the word President's Day down and say today is going to be dedicated to remembering our presidents, no one does anything to remember their presidents on that day. It's a day of sales, and it's a day that you're off from work. The bank is closed. The stock market is closed. That's how you know President's Day. When there's a ritual connected to it, it catches fire. It means something. People are involved in it. People talk about it. That's the idea of the mitzvah. We light up a nation, light onto the nations, most often by osmosis. They see what we're doing, and the message gets through. That's category number one. Eidut, testimonial laws. Let's move into category number two. Remember how many categories I said there will be? Three. We're only going to get through to category two today. And I don't know if we're going to finish category two, but next week we'll get to three, and we'll move on from there. The second category is called mishpatim, You're not going to get a quiz on that, so you don't have to memorize it. But in English, it means civil laws. Many of the 613 commandments are civil laws. Laws that govern behavior between people. The ritual law that we spoke about earlier, the testimonial law, is to remind us about something that happened to us, connecting us to God. The civil law is, how are you guys going to function with each other? What's going to govern behavior between you? When you're one small family, that's one thing, but what if when you multiply? What if when you reach 1 million people, 2 million people, 10 million people? Who's going to govern behavior patterns between you? Who's going to cover, what's going to happen with disputes amongst you? How is it going to be resolved? So some background here. I want to take you back to the book of Genesis. Book of Genesis is Adam, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, story of Joseph. That's in a nutshell. First of the patriarchs is Abraham. In the story of Abraham, we see God establishing a relationship with Abraham. Why is he establishing a relationship with Abraham? Because he saw in Abraham a candidate to be his ambassador to the world. Until then, the world was in decline. Adam and Eve, we hear about decline. Cain and Abel, decline. Generation of the flood, decline. Generation of the dispersion, decline. No one steps up to the plate to take on the role of seeing to it that mankind remains good. So individuals are good, but they don't take on the job. They're not interested in preaching to the rest of the world. Abraham is different. He preaches to the world. He taught. He showed the world kindness. He showed the world godliness. He showed the world belief, faith. He fought against idol worship. And God then will reveal himself to Abraham and tells him he's going to start a new nation from him, a chosen people through whom blessings would come to all the families on the face of the earth, to all of humanity. That relationship continues to develop, God and Abraham. And in the second portion of the story of Abraham, it's the portion called Vayera, we have a very strange verse. It's very rare in the Torah that you'll have a verse like this. God speaking to himself. The narrator is usually speaking to us, the audience. Here the narrator is sharing with us, the audience, what he said to himself at the time. That's very rare. And the conversation is as follows. God has sent 3 angels in disguise. They look like human beings, but they're angels. And they each have a mission. One is to heal Abraham from the circumcision. One is to inform Sarah that she's going to have a child. And one is going to be there to destroy the cities of Sodom. 5 cities that were wicked that God has decided he's going to destroy. The angels first stop by Abraham and they do their work by Abraham. They inform Sarah that she's going to have a child. They heal Abraham and they're on their way. We know where they're going because we know the rest of the story. Abraham has no idea where they're going. He doesn't know the rest of the story yet. He's living the story for the first time. The narrator, God, says to himself, "Shall I hide from Abraham that which I'm about to do?" Question mark. Interesting. The Creator is questioning himself if it's right to not inform Abraham what he's about to do. Now, since when does God need mankind's permission to do whatever he wants to do? But here he says to himself, "Shall I hide from Abraham that which I'm about to do?" And he goes on and explains to us, the audience, why he questioned himself at that time. And he says, number 1, it's part of the land that I promised him. I promised him this land of Canaan that's going to be a gift that I'm going to give to him and his descendants, and now I'm about to destroy part of that land. It's only right if I'm going to destroy part of the land that I gifted him that he knows about it. That's one. The second point he says is because he represents me in this world. And he needs to understand that I didn't overreact by destroying these cities, that there were no righteous people there worth saving. And the third is to give Abraham an opportunity to pray and to plead for God to change his mind, teaching us all about prayer. And even when seemingly God has made up his mind, we have the ability to pray and plead to him. This is how God words it. He says, "Shall I hide from Abraham that which I'm about to do? I love him so much." It's so beautiful to have God sharing with us that he loved Abraham. And then he tells us why he loved him. And that's so important for us, because if you want to know what was so attractive to God about Abraham, it will help us know what God wants from us. This is what he liked about Abraham, and we are Abraham's descendants. We're his grandchildren. We should try to do what Abraham did. And he says, I love him because he will bring blessings to all the families on the face of the earth. Number one, we need to know that that is our responsibility. It's not just about ourselves, it's about the world. That Abraham's love and concern for humanity was not limited to his own family, but it was for all people. Then God says, and he will command his children. He'll put great focus on seeing to it that this is not a one-generation relationship. He's going to focus on making sure it gets passed on to the next generation and the next generation and the next until this very day. It is amazing. It's amazing that the Jewish people, till today, still have a Passover Seder. It's thousands of years later that every single day, thousands of circumcisions are taking place, tens of thousands of circumcisions are taking place, thousands of years after God instructed this to Abraham, and we're still doing it. This is a credit to Abraham, that he saw to it to instill within his children and his grandchildren to pass on the torch. God is saying this back then to himself. I love him so much because I know he will pass this on from one generation to the next. What will he pass on to his children and grandchildren all the way till today? To keep the ways of God, to follow in the path of God, that his descendants will be God-focused, that his descendants will be the chariot for God in this world. In everything that we do, we will be God-focused. And then he continues the verse, and this is the key that I am bringing that down at this time. To practice kindness and justice. I love him because he will teach his children the importance of being kind and just. Kindness and justice. That we will be a godly people, that we will be a charitable people, and that we will be a just people. A people that focuses on God, and therefore we're kind, and therefore we're charitable, and therefore we follow the law. The law that God is referring to is a system that wasn't given yet. That's first going to be given come Sinai. And yet God is saying, I love him because he's going to pass this along on to his children. It's already noted by God that this nation would be known for three things: God, kindness, law. The question is asked, why in that order? Why not say law and kindness? Why does he say kindness and law? First follow the law, and then you can give charity. First pay your taxes, do the law, and then be kind. But God reverses it. God says kindness first, and then law. Law, it depends who's writing the law. is the law based on? Communism had courts as well.
Yeah, right.
Right? Does that mean it's justice? As far as the communists, yes, this is the law of the land. Saddam Hussein had courts too. The case lasted approximately 3 seconds. Stand up, you're guilty.
In the last 4 years.
Huh?
In the last 4 years in America.
I'm not going to do politics here. I'll lose half the crowd. But there's different parts of the world where there is law, but it doesn't mean anything. Why? Because it wasn't based on a system of kindness. The Abraham message will be kindness, and now build law from that. Which means the law is about protecting society, making society function, making it work, not to make the king wealthy, not to give more power to the king. Then it's law first. Kindness first means it's to benefit mankind. And that's what God says early on is the importance of the Jewish people. So a judicial system by itself doesn't guarantee anything. It's that there's the kindness of the judicial system. At the same time, if it's a system that's just kindness and has no law, that leads to chaos too. Misplaced compassion can be dangerous as well. If you let everyone pass the red light out of compassion, guess what? People are going to get hurt.
Yep. So
there has to be the combination, kindness and law, a law that's based on kindness, but law that nevertheless is respected as well. And that's why the statement of tzedek, tzedek tirdov, justice, justice you shall pursue, is such an important staple of what we're about. Civil laws. It's important to make mention, and I'll conclude with this, and we'll continue next week on it. And it becomes, I'm sure, crystal clear the more you know, that in Judaism, Jewish life for every Jew is a study of the law. It's not reserved for those that want to become lawyers or judges. The 5th grade student in a yeshiva that opens up a Talmud is already studying the details of law. It's law that's given to everyone. Everyone has access to law. The portion of Mishpatim that based on civil laws is given to each of us, the Talmud to each of us. It's a law that's for every single one of us. The Talmud was the first complete system of laws governing a society that touched upon every facet of life, while at the same time, very concerned about individual rights. The Mishpatim, the civil laws. And when these laws are presented to us in the book of Exodus, guess where it's delivered to us? Immediately after the revelation at Sinai. Immediately after the 10 Commandments. Why? To equate them together. The civil laws are from God, just like the 10 Commandments are from God. The civil laws are as important to God, just like the 10 Commandments. That's our second of our 3 categories of laws, testimonial and civil. Where we'll take off next week is the 3rd category. And the 3rd category is a little more difficult. I don't think any of you had a problem with my speech on testimonial laws. It all made sense to you. It had logic. It makes sense. I don't think any of you had a problem with the civil laws as a general category. You may have difficulty with understanding some of the laws, but the idea that God gave us a civil code is something we all applaud. We get it. But the 3rd category of laws is called Chukim. Chukim means statutes, decrees. God says, this is what I want you to do. And he doesn't finish the sentence and tell us because and give you the reason. He just says, this is what I want you to do.